3.
Okay, we'll call to order the January 17th, 2024 meeting of the Lake Stevens Planning Commission. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, which brings us to the roll call. Commissioner Jennifer Davis.
Present.
Okay. Commissioner Connor Davis.
Present.
Commissioner Bruce Morton.
Here.
Commissioner Nathan Packard.
Here.
Commissioner Linda Holt.
Here.
And then we heard from Commissioner Huxford that she would not be here tonight. Do we need a motion to excuse her?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
On our next item on the agenda, item 3, guest business. Was there anyone online? Okay, and we have no one in person. Which brings us to action items, the first of which is the election of officers for 2024. And we'll start with the election for chair. And I'll read here a nomination that was provided to us by Janice Huxford. By proxy, I would like to nominate Commissioner Connor Davis for 2024 chair.
I'll second that.
Would you be willing to
I would
be chair?
accept the motion.
Are there any other people who want to throw in their hat for chair? Okay, we have a motion for Connor Davis as chair. All those in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Congratulations. You want to take over now at the time for
Yeah,
vice chair?
It's immediate.
I'll hand my metaphorical gavel over to you. And I think our next action would be then the vice chair. And I would nominate Janice Huxford for that role.
I'll second that. Does she accept the nomination?
She would.
She. Okay.
Okay, so then we have to, all in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So moved. The so guest business. Visit. What's on the?
Yeah, was not able to.
Okay.
So we're on action item B.
Action item B, the approval of the December 6th, 2023 minutes. Everybody get an opportunity to take a look. Any amendments? Janice. Okay. I get a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So moved. Okay, moving along, the code cleanup of the public hearing. Do we have anyone virtually?
No, this gentleman. Okay, do you have this, do you need direction to run a hearing?
So you would have to officially open the public hearing.
Right.
You would ask for the staff report, then call for public comment. After public comment, you would close the public hearing and go to deliberation.
These are the things that I need to figure out.
It takes a couple meetings. We'll help you along the way.
Okay, so let's open up we'll open the meeting to the public hearing to address the code cleanup. Hand it over to the Lake Stevens staff.
All right. Thank you, Chair Davis, Commissioners. David Levitan, Senior Planner. So we are here tonight for the public hearing for the code cleanup project. That's land use application number 2022 LUA 2022-0082. This has been before the Planning Commission a number of times for work sessions, most recently on December 6th. So I'm just going to provide a really quick PowerPoint presentation, highlight a couple of the major amendments or the more prominent amendments with a focus on amendments that have had some minor changes since they were last reviewed by the Planning Commission on December 6, 2023. At any point, if you have questions about any of the amendments, I can pull those up, answer questions. We can stop, or we can do you're welcome to ask questions during the presentation, or we can wait until the end of it. But just a little bit about the project. So this was initiated way back in 2022. It was initially pretty limited in scope to kind of housekeeping amendments, other amendments to try to address either redundancies or inconsistencies. As we got into 2023 and we saw that there were going to be some necessary updates to the code, especially as it relates to different types of housing, we decided to expand the scope. That included compliance with some of the House bills that came out of the 2023 legislative session. Most notably House Bills 1110 related to middle housing and 1337 related to accessory dwelling units or ADUs. The Planning Commission held a couple of meetings in late 2022 and early 2023 to kind of to learn a little bit about the project, and then had more substantive work sessions where they reviewed draft code language on August 21st and December 6th of 2023. City staff did brief the City Council on the project last Tuesday, so January 9th of 2024. Introduced a couple of the new amendments that had been discussed conceptually with the Planning Commission at the December 6th meeting. Those included some potential amendments to permit on a limited basis storage facilities within subareas, a couple of updates related to health and social service facilities, but nothing major. Just wanted to bring them up to speed before and see if they had any feedback before we came back before the Planning Commission for a public hearing. In your packet tonight, in addition to the staff report, attachment 1 is a matrix of the 29 amendments. Those are split into 4 categories, which I'll get into on the next slide. And then there's also the draft code language, which is attachment 2 on pages 13 through 52 of your packets. So that's in strike through underline format. Just a note that was in the staff report, this will be reformatted and kind of in a different sequence, basically chronologically by section number of the Lake Stevens Municipal Code in advance of the City Council public hearing. So that is basically to adhere to the proper format for an ordinance. We'll be kind of consolidating a couple of these code amendments, making sure that they're sequentially in order so that they're easy to adopt via ordinance and to make the necessary revisions to the different code sections. So just a reminder on the 4 different categories, we have kind of the most minor amendments are the housekeeping amendments, the most limited in scope, generally just things like removing outdated zoning districts, addressing gender neutrality. Category 2, which is minor updates, things like updated definitions or clarification of code applicability. Category 3, which really be the focus of tonight as far as some of the revisions that have occurred since your December 6th meeting. That's the aforementioned compliance with House Bill 1110 related to duplexes and other middle housing types. House Bill 1337 as it relates to accessory dwelling units or ADUs, and then the potential addition of the to allow on a limited basis storage facilities within the commercial district designation, zoning designation within subareas, which would be consistent with the permissible uses within that district outside of subareas. So this would basically provide a little bit more consistency, but on a much more limited basis. And then category 4, which is a couple of process code amendments that kind of the low-hanging fruit from the process code amendment, which is a standalone amendment, which Principal Planner Melissa Place will be bringing back before you in the next few months, kind of more substantive updates to chapters 14, 16A in 1416B of the Lake Stevens Municipal Code. We wanted to address a couple of the easier to update items as part of this code cleanup. So just a little bit on some of the highlights of some of the prior feedback from the Planning Commission. This was both on December 6th, also dating back to your August meeting, and then incorporating a little bit of the feedback from the City Council on January 9th. So really some of the more prominent discussions that we had at the last meeting were continuing the discussion on parking for accessory dwelling units. So we did discuss this at your December 6th meeting. House Bill 1337 does allow the city to require 2 parking spaces per ADU for lot sizes over 6,000 square feet or 6,000 square feet and above. And the city can only require 1 parking space for lots that are smaller than 6,000 square feet. The city's existing development standard for parking for ADUs is 1 parking space per ADU, regardless of size, regardless of unit size, and regardless of lot size. So staff, just to provide a little bit more consistency, is proposing to maintain that 1 parking space per ADU, whether it be a 6,000 square foot lot, a 10,000 square foot lot, or even larger. We did brief the City Council on this, and they were generally comfortable with that proposal of 1 space per ADU. But we would welcome any additional comments tonight if any commissioners have different thoughts. As I mentioned, so at your last meeting, we had not yet developed draft code language, but another item that's included and that we're kind of identifying tonight is the potential for allowing storage facilities within sub areas on a very limited basis. That would be limited to just sub areas for lots with a commercial district or CD zoning designation. So it wouldn't apply to downtown Lake Stevens. It would largely apply primarily to the 20th Street Southeast sub area, 20th Street Southeast corridor sub area, and then also the Lake Stevens Center sub area over near Frontier Village. And so there were some concerns that were expressed at both your last meeting on December 6th and then also from the City Council, just as far as, you know, is this something that we want to be doing? Storage facilities can be they can take up a lot of land and they don't generate a whole lot of jobs. And so staff is proposing this primarily because we continue to hear interest from the development community. We're trying to balance some of the interest from developers with the need to meet our growth targets and also to make sure that we're promoting kind of more active uses within our commercial zoning districts. So we thought this was an appropriate level as to allow them on a very limited basis. Basically, they would be limited to 15% of the gross commercial floor area for that site. So say you had you had 10,000 square feet of gross commercial floor area, you wouldn't be able to do more than 1,500 square feet of storage. So you're probably not likely to see one that small, but if they say there was a slightly larger project that was, 20,000 square feet, you'd be able to go up to 3,000 square feet. It basically provides the director with some additional ability to allow these uses. As proposed, they're identified as a special use as opposed to a primary or a secondary use. So there's a hierarchy. There will continue to be a hierarchy of uses within the sub areas where primary use is at the top, then secondary uses, and then you really need to demonstrate why these types of special uses are warranted as part of a development application. They would continue to require a conditional use permit. So that provides some additional approval criteria and some additional discretion for the city to review these and ultimately approve them. The applicant would need to demonstrate that they meet all of the criteria, and that would include generally the intent of the sub area and how that would function and how it would contribute to kind of the goals and the vision of that sub area. So again, we're not tied to this specifically. If commissioners are not comfortable with this, or if they make a recommendation and city council's not, we would welcome that additional feedback.
And Manager Levitan, I've
kind of spoken about this. I'm not a fan of any of the storage units really in Lake Stevens. I'd love to see them move out into unincorporated areas. It's a storage unit, doesn't even need to be within the city limits. You don't go and visit it often. Some people do, but it seems like if there's a 15% cap, then that is kind of a prohibitive measure. Are there many lots available for development that are big enough for, you know, to then have like sufficient room for 20 to 25,000 square feet of space, which would seem to be, I mean, even a small storage facility would be 20,000 square feet. If you guys, track any metrics on available space that's out there, applications that have come in, permits that have been pulled, with, I know the site off of Grade Road in 92 is one that's been discussed. If that would fall under this threshold of 15% as well.
So the grade road is not within a sub area. It's also vested. It's actually vested to the regulations that were in place even before we updated the storage facilities code back in, I can't remember if that was 2021 or 2022. But so that wouldn't be impacted by this, one, because it's not in a sub area, and two, because it's already vested to a previous code. So this would apply, as I mentioned, it wouldn't apply to downtown because we don't have CD zone properties. We have Central Business District or BD, and also some mixed use here to the west. So it wouldn't apply to downtown. It would apply to properties along 20th Street and then within Lake Stevens Center. Russ may have a better understanding of kind of the development potential of some of the parcels that are out there. Obviously, they change hands and sites redevelop. But, we have had some interests for some pending projects. I think one which would fall within this 15% threshold. So Russ can maybe touch on that a little bit more.
Sure. So in the Lake Stevens Center, you'd really look at this clause through infill development. So if somebody was building a commercial project, and this would again not be a primary use, so it couldn't be a standalone use. It would have to somehow support the greater project. And on 20th Street corridor, that's where the most likelihood that we would see that for new construction. There is still a pretty large chunk of vacant land on the south side of 20th Street zoned commercial. And so that also might be where we see these things. And there are a couple of projects where people are discussing this as part of their pre-application and would like to have this as an additional component. But again, we would like to ensure that if there is an appetite to expand this use, that it is very limited and not the primary use on the site and otherwise screened.
One just follow up about the sub area, the downtown sub area, with Grade Road being considered as this conduit, this artery, the welcome, mat to Lake Stevens. If there's precedent or what the likelihood of expanding the sub area out Grade Road so there's more continuity with future development, and I know beautification efforts are going to expand out there. If that's even remote possibility.
That's another topic. When we went through the downtown plan, we were fairly deliberate that we wanted Grade Road to be that entryway into the city. But excuse me, the majority of Grade Road doesn't have the characteristics of more intense urban development. So that's kind of why we tried to really stick to this traditional downtown core, and then you have these sort of ancillary areas that become more suburban very quickly, if not even rural in character, where some of the large natural resource areas are going out Grade Road. So
Thank you.
Well, if I can just inject on the issue of the storage units, I share your concern. I see a lot of commercial development that has a higher I guess we'll say revenue per square foot going in just on the other side of the city line.
And that's tax revenue that's going to another city and not ours. So anything that can be done to, I guess, dissuade the development of these low revenue production storage units, I would be heavily in favor of that, even going lower than 15%. I mean, really kind of pushing back against that kind of development.
That's why I've mentioned even, unincorporated Snohomish County. Trying to figure out a way to just
Right.
nudge it outside of the.
And,
growth
and
areas.
again, you don't have to recommend that we retain this, we've just brought this forward. Hey, this is something we've heard from a few people in the development community. The city council, planning commission spent a lot of time working on this issue in 2022, and they said we don't want it in sub areas. So that can still be your recommendation. You don't have to, if you're saying you want a lower threshold, that is a lower threshold.
Yeah, I would support lowering it substantially, even
So-
to zero, honestly, because because I mean, I look at potential structural deficit issues in the future, and where is our revenue coming from, and I just don't see revenue generation from a storage unit like I would from a commercial business, something that has more foot traffic, something that has maybe tech involved, or a more I guess aggressive sales ability.
Yeah, I think you'll find that the owners of the storage units are highly in favor of this amendment also.
Chair Davis, can I speak remotely?
You may.
Commissioner Davis. So I just wanted to ask a quick question of staff about this. The idea of limiting the gross commercial floor area to 15%. I was reading the proposed code language, and I may have not interpreted it correctly, but it seemed that the floor area was meant to be internal to whatever the commercial use is, so that it wouldn't be a standalone storage facility. It would be more for the use of whatever business wants to occupy that space. So I was curious if you could provide, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just curious about maybe like an example that you've envisioned of the type of business that would come to Lake Stevens that would be job producing, but that might have a need for this type of storage, because I think we pretty much got broad consensus that big standalone storage facilities we may not be as much in favor of, but I'm curious about what type of business would want to incorporate a small percentage of their overall floor space to storage, if that makes sense, to support their business.
Yeah, I can give you an example. So in a mixed use development that has, say, 20-30,000 square feet of commercial, 100, maybe 200 units of residential. And that's one of the things we are looking at. It's actually in this case, it's treated a little bit differently, but the idea is, yeah, hey, if I have some dead space in my building, I can't use this space for any other purpose. Is it appropriate that then I have this storage space? It's primarily going to be facilitating the needs of the folks in the apartments, but hey, I can also open it up because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of houses within a mile of me. So that's kind of an example of where it could be a benefit to a development. At the same token, we recognize that there are major storage facilities at, say, 3 of the entryways into the city. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, yeah, as much as I don't like storage facilities, right, they do have a purpose and they do get used, right? I'm not aware of many storage facilities that aren't at close to max capacity all the time, right? So you have to have some in the city, I think, as part of a public interest. And yeah, I think of like running down 9, where down like in Machias, right? They put one down by the Azteca restaurant. Big, I mean, it looks really nice. It's off to the side. They even are putting RVs and boats, and right, there's value in that, and having that type of space for the city. We just need to find the right place for it. So,
And we have the prototype of that in the city.
yeah.
Same owner. Yeah.
Yeah.
The language in the proposal is using 25%. Special regulations proposed in Amendment 27 also limit storage facilities to no more than 25% of the gross commercial floor area on the lot. It's Page 6.
Oh, is that of the staff report? Yeah, that would be incorrect. It would be 15%. So if you look at page 43 of the packet, it includes the code language in underline there, new subsection 8. So the various provisions, so it's subject to the following special regulations. An administrative conditional use permit is required. Standalone storage facilities are prohibited. Storage facilities shall not exceed 15% of the gross commercial floor area. Outdoor storage is prohibited. The storage shall support at least one primary use on the project site or within the immediate vicinity. And then all other provisions of 1444-044 would apply. So yeah, I apologize for the incorrect information in the staff report.
Yeah, so I'll touch back on the recreational vehicle storage, right? How is that covered here? Is that considered outdoor storage?
It is.
RV storage, yeah, would be.
So
Would be
we're
a-
not gonna have
Yeah,
any sort of RV
this is
storage?
intended basically, kind of more in the examples that Russ had cited. You know, we don't want it encompassing the entire site. It's meant to be a limited use, an indoor use. So it's not a prominent use on there. You might not even know that the storage facility is there. Whereas, you know, like toy barn or something like that would be, you can obviously tell what that is
Yeah.
when you see it.
And so maybe just for clarification for you, this is not citywide. It's in very specific districts, and
Yeah.
the city does have regulations and zones that do allow standalone storage units and outdoor storage of personal goods. So we do have that. So this doesn't take away any right from the city today.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Levitan, is there anything else that you need to cover within the highlights?
Yeah, let me give it, if we're done with the storage facilities for now, I was just gonna note just a couple of other, one minor addition was Amendment 13. That was just something that we had noticed. So level 2 health and social service facilities is actually a definition. So health and social service facilities is a definition that was basically carried over from the Snohomish County Code, kind of word for word. We're probably the only 2 jurisdictions that use those definitions. And so level 2 facilities kind of run the gamut between kind of a smaller, like kind of adult family home type of uses, which obviously are consistent with residential neighborhoods, but they also include things as large as hospitals. So we wanted to clarify for some of those more intensive kind of commercial type of uses that they may not be appropriate for residential zoning districts. That includes, they're currently allowed with a conditional use permit in the MFR, in the multifamily zone, and also in the RA12 zone. So we just are proposing to add some language to that to note that they may not be appropriate in residential zones. And then we, at the same time, we also notice that these level 2 facilities, that especially the ones that are more commercial in nature, they're not currently included in the non-residential permissible use table. So basically, as of now, they're only allowed in these residential zones because they're not included in the non-residential use table, which is 1440-2. And so we wanted to make sure that we added that use because it is largely, especially for these larger facilities, they are more appropriate for commercial zones. So we wanted to make sure that we included that. I think that was just something that wasn't carried over in the permissible use code update that was done a couple of years ago. So that's Amendment 13. And then just wanted to highlight a couple of changes that we had made both to Amendment 21, which is kind of the duplexes, the House Bill 1110 related to middle housing, and also to Amendment 22 related to accessory dwelling units. There is some language in each of those House bills related to how the city can regulate these uses within critical areas, environmentally sensitive areas. So we added some language just noting that the city does have the discretion when there are critical areas on a site to basically take that into account when evaluating whether either a duplex or multiple detached ADUs would be appropriate. If they're going to obviously impact a critical area or its buffer, that needs to be accounted for in the development application. And so it does give the city some discretion, and we believe that it is consistent with the language within House Bills 1110 and 1337. So both of those, I've sent this language off to the Department of Commerce and specifically to their housing team, just so they can review it. We've been very clear with them that we're probably ahead of the curve, ahead of most cities as far as complying with these House bills. We don't have to have final code language until June of 2025, but our code was already set up in a way where we allow most of these middle housing types. We already allow detached ADUs. So they were relatively minor changes in Lake Stevens, where some other jurisdictions are basically having to completely rewrite their ADU and their middle housing regulations. We thankfully, over the years, we've been pretty proactive in trying to increase our housing diversity as far as different types of housing units. So these are pretty minor changes for us.
Is waterfront considered critical area?
Like Lake Stevens?
Yeah.
It's, I mean, it's,
The short answer is yes, but it's treated
Yeah,
in a
it-
different way outside of our critical areas ordinance. It falls under the shoreline
Okay.
regulation. So
So would someone be able to build a duplex on the lake?
yes,
they can currently build a duplex on the lake.
And these changes don't affect that, right?
They wouldn't. They would basically, what the only change this would make would currently you're required to have more than 100% of the minimum lots
Mhm.
size for a detached single family residence. And what House Bill 1110 did is that you have to allow a duplex on any lot that allows for a detached single family residence. So you can't require the larger lot size. So throughout most of the city, we basically had to reduce that. We require 125% of the minimum lot size for a detached single family residence. So if you had a 6,000 square foot lot where you could build a single family home, you used to have to have 7,500 square feet for a duplex, but now you can build it on that same 6,000 square foot lot. And then one other minor update to Amendment 21 is just clarifying some additional language that was in the House bill related to allowing zero lot line subdivisions. So basically, if you build a side-by-side duplex on a 6,000 square foot lot, you can then essentially do a zero lot line subdivision. As long as you're not increasing the density for the underlying lot, you could basically create 3,000 square foot lots. You can't make them any smaller than that. So it's basically, it's kind of, we don't take into account the ownership of the individual units. So we do allow either condominiumization for kind of a stacked unit or a zero lot line subdivision for a side by side. And that's all language that's within the House bill that we're required to comply with. All right, so those were the kind of the major updates since the December 6th work session. So just a little bit on procedure and process. So the city has filed the required 60-day notice with the Department of Commerce. We've received basically almost no comments. We had some minor comments from the Department of Natural Resources, which we've incorporated into one amendment. But as I mentioned, we haven't heard back from the Department of Commerce. I routed that again to them yesterday just to ping them, because if they are going to comment on it, I'd rather have that happen before the city council public hearing as opposed to after. We completed a SEPA checklist and issued the SEPA threshold determination, issued a determinant of non-significance last week or 2 weeks ago now on January 4th. That public comment period ends tomorrow on January 18th, and we haven't received any comments to date. Issued the required notice of public hearing and threshold determination on January 4th, and have not received any written comments. Following the staff presentation, there will be an opportunity, should anybody show up all of a sudden, to provide public comments. And then the city council public hearing, basically this is a type 6 land use application. So it requires a public hearing and a public hearing before and a recommendation from the planning commission. That recommendation is then forwarded on to the city council. They hold their own public hearing and then consider the planning commission's recommendation before potentially adopting the code amendment by ordinance. And that's currently scheduled for February. We're finalizing the date. Our original date, that meeting is going to be canceled. So we're working out the specifics on that. So as I mentioned, type 6 legislative amendments, specifically related to code amendments. It's Lake Stevens Municipal Code section 14.16C.075. Includes the approval criteria and the findings that are required from the city council. And these are basically the basis for the planning commission's recommendation to the city council. Basically the code amendment needs to demonstrate consistency with the comp plan, compliance with the Growth Management Act, and then demonstrate that it helps to enhance the public health as opposed to the public health, safety and welfare. The staff report goes into those findings and those approval criteria, and staff has determined that the proposal is consistent with the approval criteria. And as such, staff is recommending that the planning commission review the proposed amendments and forward a recommendation to city council to approve the code amendment covered by LUA 2022-0082 with any requested revisions. That includes storage facilities or any of the other code sections that you'd like to make changes or you would like to delete. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions before you open up for public comment.
I have no further questions.
I just had one clarifying question.
Yeah.
On page 38, where we talk about parking and where it says one off-street parking space per ADU is required in addition to the parking required for the primary dwelling unit. And just for clarification, it's one or more, right? It's not that you shall have just one.
No, they can provide one. Yeah, that's a minimum.
Okay, do we say minimum somewhere in here? Because it just as I read this, it says you'll have one. And I just want to make sure it's clear that
Or add.
it's at least one,
Yeah, we can make that.
Yeah, we can make that minor change.
just so we don't get caught later. That's all I had.
Any other questions? Open this up to public comment. Nobody in the audience?
So then
There
you would
a-
close the public.
Close the public comment section.
Comment portion and ask for deliberation amongst the commissioners.
Deliberation amongst the commissioners. Thank you, Russ.
Well, I personally am not in favor of the limitations on the storage facilities, but I think that it seems like there's consensus, so I'm not gonna really, I don't really have a huge objection to it. Other than that, I'm in favor of all these changes as is.
And I'm totally fine with all the changes. I went through and read everything and thought it made a lot of sense.
Bruce, do you care to elaborate on?
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's a kind of a blanket rule to try to limit these the storage facilities. I think the storage facilities tend to go in areas that are that can't be used for anything else, like the clock tower storage facilities under the power lines. Nobody would want to build anything else under a power line. So that's a good use under there. And there might be other hidden little corners and such where storage facility is a good thing to use, where it wouldn't be used for anything else. Who knows? And as I mentioned, I'm sure the the current owners of the storage facilities would love to have this regulation in. Who does it harm? It harms future potential owners of facilities, and it also harms the citizens by driving up the prices of self-storage. I personally don't do self-storage. I'm not a hoarder. And I don't think that's a huge limitation on freedom, but yeah, I personally would, that's why I said I'm not in favor of this change, but I'm not gonna start a fight over it.
But Russ, to clarify what you were trying to say to me earlier, right? That this is to specific sub areas of the city. So just for clarification, like the clock storage, would that currently fall under these limitations, or is that?
Not,
It would not. Okay, so
No.
things like that are outside of that
right.
commercial district.
It's outright permitted in the industrial zones. And then it is excuse me, I don't know if it's an administrative or an outright permitted use in other areas of the commercial district.
It's administrative within the local business and the commercial district outside of sub areas, and it's currently outright prohibited with any designated sub area. So you can't build it in downtown. Well, you wouldn't be under this regulation, but you currently can't build them along 20th Street. You can't build them along SR9 or off of Vernon or other portions that are covered by Lake Stevens Center.
Which wouldn't be a good place for it anyway, because that's high value real estate.
Right.
They are.
That's something I can share as well, just for context. The sub areas are something the city's been working on since 2012. Those have gone through this planning commission. Commissioners Holt and Davis have spent a lot of time on those documents, and they implement the city's economic growth strategy by localizing preferred growth in these higher impact areas. So that's been the purpose of creating each of these sub areas that have unique characteristics of what they can bring to the community. That's why they've sort of been held back from these overarching regulations where they're allowed in other areas, more fringe areas of the cities.
Just a hypothetical, right here, the northwest corner, Main Street and 20th, the development, there's 50,000 square feet of residential, call it 20,000 square feet of commercial. So hypothetically, you could have, what is that one to be? 10,500 square feet of storage. And that's where I've seen it most, efficiently and aesthetically built in, is when it's in a mixed use development you don't even see the storage, it doesn't look like a storage facility. It's kind of hidden. It usually set back. So that is hypothetically for that a development, for them to be able to use that, and they would be tied in, invested, or I'm sorry, future development there would have to abide by the 15% cap, correct?
Well, so it wouldn't apply to here because this is the downtown zone, and it doesn't have a commercial district, a CD zoning designation. So none of downtown, most of this area is kind of central business district, which is a separate zoning designation than CD, which is commercial district.
Okay.
So this would apply only to the commercial district zoning designation, which is primarily within the 20th Street and the Lake Stevens Center. So it applies to Frontier Village, and then it applies to the 20th Street Southeast Corridor. And then there are a couple areas outside of the sub areas that also have CD zoning designations, and which are currently allowed to have storage facilities through that administrative conditional use process.
So hypothetically, if you looked at the property on the south side of 20th Street Southeast and 99th, there's a vacant lot there.
Okay.
It would apply there on a smaller scale than what's, up here, but that's the kind of site that this would apply to.
And you would not get credit for the residential component of your project, just for the gross commercial, just the gross commercial floor area. So it would be, you'd have to have a relatively, even at 30,000 square feet of commercial, you're 15% is still only 4,500 square feet storage facility. So it's still a pretty minor use. And so it's really intended to be like if you have leftover space or you have something or kind of the back where you don't care as much about having kind of active street frontage and things like that. That you have some additional space on your site and you don't really know what to do with it, or that you have a residential component and you'd really like to offer this as a service either to your residents of your residential component or just to the, if there's basically kind of a need for it within the general sub area as well. So yeah, it's not a primary use, it's not a secondary use, it's very much kind of a special use that's very limited in scope. But that being said, I mean, if it needs some additional work or if this is something as part of our larger discussion of our sub areas, it doesn't have to be included as part of this. And if there is some interest in the future, could be tackled through, a separate amendment.
My concern is just about not the residential square footage not tying into the allocation for storage capacity. That to me would seem to be the most sensible tie-in versus the commercial allocation. That's where, yeah.
Right, so if you were doing that, the percentage would have to change radically to probably no more than 5%, because at that point, you're talking about a Florida area ratio where you're gonna have 30,000 square feet of commercial, and then you're going to have 120,000 square feet
Right.
of residential above that 30,000 square feet.
So now we're
of
getting closer to
commercials.
Commissioner Dewar's figure.
Right, so then
What I'm getting concerned about,
the
yeah.
math would change.
Okay. Now I think that the math should change if it's a dense residential, because thinking, how do we create more incentive for mixed use, a high density development along 20th Street? And if that revenue generator of storage can be a component, and that is just cash that you don't,
Mhm.
there's no cost on a month-to-month basis to maintain that. It is that's bread and butter for a developer. So to figure out a way to have that as an incentive to the mixed use development, that's where I would, maybe if we do need to address that math so that is that carrot for developers.
I would say that's probably definitely beyond where we are
Okay,
today.
yeah.
But I would just throw out hypothetically, if you wanted to flip the calculation. So with the 30,000 square feet at 15%, that would achieve 4,500 square feet of this type of use on that site. If you flip the math to 120,000 square feet of residential at 5%, that would yield 6,000 square feet of this use. So even if you wanted to keep those
Close.
numbers closer, then, we're probably now talking about 4% or 3%, or which seems a little odd,
Right.
but, but we still think in those sort of big linear numbers. So anyway, that's just sort of a point of context. And we recognize this was sort of a late addition to this, and it started to take on a life of its own. So if this is not the right format for it, it doesn't have to move forward tonight.
If nothing was to occur to, what would our status quo look like? Would they be able to build it all?
No.
Okay.
Well, I can't say that. They could request an administrative interpretation to look at specific cases and ask me to make a judgment call with an accessory use, if that would be considered an accessory use, but it would be straight out never allowed as a primary or secondary use.
Any other comments? Commissioner Davis?
I think my only comment is that given that that use is currently prohibited in the sub areas, that adding this, what I think is kind of a fractional percentage use, just gives more incentive for that type of mixed use development to take place as we've been hoping for the last 10 years. And I think all the negatives that we've discussed about standalone storage really wouldn't apply in this. Kind of what I'm envisioning is you have commercial businesses on the first floor of a building, you have apartments, and then some commercial business has a fractional space that they think, wait, I can make that bike storage for these apartments. Or somebody could store their kayaks so that they can use them on Lake Stevens, but they live in an apartment. So to me, that type of use and providing a little bit of more flexibility is not a bad thing. And so I'm in favor of recommending this to council.
Yeah, I can certainly accept that logic. I mean, my concern is, I'd much rather have, say, if we have space and we're not sure what to do with it, if I'm a developer, I'd much rather see that be a doctor's office or a retail establishment or something like that. If there's truly nothing that can be done with the space, then let's generate some sort of revenue out of it. But let's make it something that needs to be not primary, not secondary, but tertiary at the most.
What are the thoughts about adopting this or send along to the council as stated?
I think as stated with that one clarification.
Oh,
About the 25,
The minimum.
the 25% and then the minimum of
25%.
Yeah. Or was that 25% just in the coverage?
That was a Scrivener's error. So
Yeah, that was just an error. Yeah.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, next
And
is,
did the public hearing get closed or just the public comment portion?
comment was closed. Okay. How do I close the public
So
hearing?
usually you would close the public hearing and then
And then, all right,
your motion. So you can just by chair's proclamation say.
by chair's proclamation,
yeah,
the public
hearing is closed.
hearing is closed. All right,
We'll get you the Roberts Rules cheat sheet. We have some extra copies. So
perfect. All right, moving on to the commissioner's report. Start with Commissioner Dewar.
I have nothing to say except congratulations and we support you all the way.
Commissioner Holt.
Yeah, for Christmas, we went to Hilton Head. And because my kids didn't want to come home, they wanted to go to Hilton Head. So my son and daughter-in-law moved to Chicago, my daughter's in Brooklyn, and they said, let's go to Hilton Head. And I said, okay, we're going for Christmas. And they said, no, let's go from the 26th to the 1st. And then my daughter flew to Chicago and then drove down with her brother and sister-in-law. And I had never been to Hilton before. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It was a really cool place to be. We had an incredible house and it was amazing. So I want to go back. I want to go back.
Right,
And that's it.
Commissioner Morty.
We've discussed in the past, or there's been some discussion about how the city has sent or last year sent a request to extend the UGA to the county. And the county rejected that. Could we get a copy of that response from the county?
yes. And so let me clarify a couple of things. So
Okay.
we submitted several docket applications to the county. They did not move forward with 3 or 4 of the city's applications. They did move one forward. Since then, they're going through their comprehensive plan process. They have presented it to the planning commission, the one that they moved forward, and they have recommended denial of that one. At the same time, there are county council initiated land use amendments that do put some of the city's requests back into play, which are being reviewed under the 3 alternatives of their comprehensive plan. But we can definitely, please remind me later, we can provide you that documentation of the county process as it relates to our urban growth area expansion requests.
So when they give a response, do they give a justification or do they just?
Yes, they do.
Okay, good. Thanks. That's all.
Commissioner Packard?
So this is more of a question than a report, but from last night, I guess I will just say I did not know what to expect going into that and was not prepared at all for what happened. Not that anything happened, but I guess the fact that nothing happened, I wasn't prepared for that either. So I don't know if it's just because I haven't done one of those before. But I guess, yeah, perhaps in the future, we as a planning commission can, and maybe we did and I just missed it, but plan on what we're going to collectively say and how collectively we're going to approach a meeting like that next time. If I had thought about it a little bit more, maybe I would have had something to say. But yeah, I didn't even know I was going to be asked to say anything. So yeah, maybe, I don't know if it was a miscommunication within ourselves or between the city council and us, but I just wasn't prepared for what that was going to look like. And consequently, I had no value in to bring or really to collect out of that engagement. So
We got some praise from the city council.
it was great. Yeah, but we did, I mean, I didn't bring anything. I didn't need to be there to receive that praise. I'm not saying I didn't want to be there, but I just didn't see the point, I guess, or what the objective was. I didn't know the objective up front, and so I'm not sure we maximized the opportunity there.
Commissioner Jennifer Davis?
Nothing for me tonight. Thank you.
And yeah, just for myself, I tip my hat to the work that Lake Stevens did on the oh my gosh, Sunset Beach. That's something my family and I visit regularly. It's a beautiful addition to the city's parks. You guys know how much I love seeing the maturation of the city and full utilization of the parks and access to more waterfront. So yeah, really appreciate the work and how you've got the steps, the ramps. I know people were concerned about the grade of the lawn. It was done excellently. Really appreciate the work on that. And that's all that I have. We'll move on to the planning director's report.
Okay, thank you all last night for attending the joint meeting. Great feedback. So typically it is just more of an open forum. There's usually not a specific agenda other than you've discussed the work program for that year. These occur anywhere usually between December, January, and just to allow the sort of council to look at that program and then reflect on the work you've done. So the tempo was pretty standard, but it does provide that opportunity if, you would like to pose more substantive questions to the council so we can look at that format and make sure everyone's prepared next year. I don't believe all of you stuck around for the rest of the meeting, but we did present our annual department report. And if those of you who didn't look at it in the packet, another extremely busy year for this department. We were up on land use permits, a little down on building permits, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Lots of process improvements, staff training, coordination. And so it's always nice just to put that report out so people can really see what does this department do, both, internally for the citizens, and then how do we work outside of the jurisdiction, whether we're working on state, legislation, county, city building code issues. So we all try to stay very active in our roles and our professions.
Well, with that, we have a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn for the evening.
Okay, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? All right. With that, adjourn.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Promise to watch a YouTube video as well, right?
You did great. Somebody else got nominated to be chair.